We are live. So good evening, everyone. We're going to let a couple people join the site, but it is another Thursday evening with Carroll for Council and our D3 check-in and just our education sessions, really. Updates about what's going on in District 3 as well as the city as a whole. And as always, we know that housing is an ongoing concern, housing and homelessness. And we are blessed this evening to be joined by the illustrious Junious Williams, formerly of the Urban Strategies Council, but just an all-around just guru on all things housing. So Mr. Williams, I know you said to call you Junious. Thank you for being here with us today. We're going to get into some of the topics that many of the people who elected me really care about, and that's housing as a human right, land use, community benefits. So thank you for being here. And if you could start off with a little bit about what you're doing and some of the things that you care about surrounding housing, that would be wonderful.
Well, thank you, first of all, Council Member Fife, for inviting me. Since I left Urban Strategies Council, my work has changed somewhat in that I've been a senior advisor for the Collective Impact Forum at the Aspen Institute, and I've been working with folks around the country on using this collective impact, which is a multi-sector collaborative approach to try to change really intractable long-term social issues. So the work has broadened far beyond housing to all of the sort of issues that especially urban communities need to deal with. But my primary housing work right now remains with the Oakland Community Land Trust, which I'm a co-founder of, and I continue to serve as a board president. So most of my view of housing right now is around how to expand one of, I think, the best models for creating permanently affordable housing, which is part of what we need to do to solve the larger problem. As you cannot let the market take care of people, because markets don't care for people. And so you have to intervene in strategic ways to deal with the market and to take precious housing stock out of the speculative market. And that's what we've been trying to do with the Oakland Community Land Trust.
And I'll just be the first to say that thank you for that. I know it was a project that you started along with Desley Brooks and folks at ACE. I think it may have been under a different name back in the day. But just yesterday, in terms of the Oakland Community Land Trust, ACE members that are in East Oakland in District 5 just closed on the purchase of a 4-unit building that they otherwise would have been displaced from with the help of the Oakland Community Land Trust. And I've seen firsthand the benefits that community ownership does for people's lives. So I'm glad that you raised that. And it is one of the ways that we take homes off the speculative market. And around the time that this was created, it was the previous mortgage and financial crisis, correct?
Yeah. It was the 2008 foreclosure crisis and you mentioned ACE. Our partner at the time was Acorn, which was the predecessor to ACE. And quite frankly, it was devastating to go into East Oakland. I mean, the volume of foreclosures hitting Black and brown people out there was just devastating. And it may have been a recession for some people, but it was depression for many Oakland residents who, on top of everything else, lost their homes.
So, Junious, what parallels do you see to that particular crisis and the pandemic that we're living in right now? Because there are a lot of Black and brown families and individuals lost their homes during that particular housing crisis. But we're in a housing crisis right now. So are there any similarities or parallels that you can draw, and what do we need to do now to address the existing crisis?
Well, a couple of things I think are similar. We have in this crisis postponed the mass displacement of people, but as the moratoria and other things cease, we're going to face a wave that is similar to the wave of the foreclosures and resulting evictions, or just people abandoning properties that they knew that they weren't going to be able to retrieve, because at the time some of those exploitative mortgage devices were coming into play, and there was no way, when they recalculated from that introductory mortgage rates that a lot of Black and brown families had, or those introductory loan packages that folks have in terms of equity loans. So my concern is that we need to think about what are the policy strategies that hold people in place in their current housing. We can't send a new wave of people into being unhoused in this community. And especially on top, and I think one of the things that's different that's worth mentioning is, as devastating as the psychological impacts of what happened in 2008 to 2010 were, it's worse this time because there's an overlay of a pandemic. So the level of additional trauma related to health-related concerns, and the way that that is winding down through families. I just think, just as a general matter to get out of house, I think the whole society is underestimating the level of trauma that all of us are experiencing, and the need to make sure where we can to stabilize people. And one area that we need to stabilize people, we don't need any more unhoused people.
Right.
And the balance, I mean, people are talking about the violence and the spike in violence. Well, don't you think it has something to do with the level of trauma? You know, we were already a community with a high level of trauma going on, and you add what's happened between the economic and the pandemic. So I don't mean to go on, but I'm just really worried that we're underestimating all of this. And what we should be saying is, what are the strategies and policies that will keep as many people as possible in place? Because we need to keep them in place, and we need to get the unhoused people housed. The other thing, just quickly,
sure,
the capital investment. You know, this is when you let a problem exacerbate the way that we have in terms of the housing crisis, it gets more and more expensive. So we need to be looking for the $200 or $300 million resources solution. And I'm not talking about the whole state or anything. I'm talking about what you would need to really try to control the instincts of the market here in Oakland. When all the moratorium and everything gets relaxed, the worst among us are going to behave abhorrently, and we need to be prepared with policies that undercut some of that, or we're not going to have much community left, and that's my fear right now.
That is frightening. But I'm glad these are the hard conversations that we have to have. So you're saying $200 to $300 million for Oakland alone?
Yeah, I think that we have to wade into the housing market, and the community has to have enough capital to begin to affect the market. To say, you know, when these houses, as we're doing in the land trust, when they go on of the market, that there are community groups there with enough liquid resources. Because see, one of the things that happened with us in the competition during the foreclosure crisis is that we were hamstrung by federal regulations, which were stupid, which put us at a competitive disadvantage and really gave the market to the speculators. That was federal policy that created that. This time we need to have a bunch of liquid assets. So when stuff goes on the market, we go in and we purchase it. We can compete with the speculators out there, because all of the best housing stock during that, we got none of that.
Right.
We couldn't offer, we had restrictions on how much we could offer based on the appraised value. We had to do a historical preservation review with the state before we could make an offer. There were a bunch of structural things that kept us from being competitive and let the speculators come in and take all of the best housing stock that had lower levels of rehab requirements and all of that. So that's why I'm saying having a big pool of capital in the hand of trusted community groups to go in and to pick up housing stock all over the city.
So where do we get that? And I'm asking because this is a question that comes up all of the time. Like, great, you have great ideas, wonderful solutions. How are we going to pay for it? Where do we get this capital, these liquid resources, to be able to compete with the market and to be able to compete with speculators?
Yeah. Well, one of the things, and I'm trying, and we're starting to have this conversation. I'm not a finance person, but we're having the conversation at the Oakland Community Land Trust about that. I have over the years heard about all of these like social venture capitalists who are out there. And one of the things is that, well, we never, because we're coming from the social sector, we never come with big deals. That I need a tranche of 20 or 30 million dollars. I don't need a little 200,000, 300,000. Right. And so people are saying, well, where are these venture capitalists and how do we connect with them who have a social justice sort of agenda, who are willing to do some things differently than they've traditionally done in terms of underwriting criteria, in terms of interest rates, in terms of how much they expect to earn off of the investment. A lot of that has to be restructured. But if you're really serious about doing socially good venture capitalism, then you can't come in with the same rules that are operating in the general markets, which have failed the people that we're talking about serving. So I don't look to them. So I'm thinking about, where are the Chan Zuckerbergs? Where are the other people who are talking about social venture capital? This is the opportunity for them to come forward. And no more important issue. Two most important issues for me in this society right now is who gets the vote and all this madness and suppression going on that we're sort of walking along like this shit. Like this stuff is normal.
Speak freely, sir.
Yeah,
please.
This stuff is not normal.
Right.
For people to be, to be figuring out ways to keep people from voting. So housing and voting, to me, are two foundational issues for the survival of this democracy. We're not going to be stable with a level of people who are unhoused or are unstable in whatever the housing condition or can't afford it. That's a formula for a societal failure. And if people can't vote, and I hear a lot of this discussion about the voice. Having voice is great, but real voice is the power in voting, and that's why they're assailing the right to vote in 43 straight states and over 300 bills. So those are the two things that, to me, are central. And in both of those, I think businesses have a role to play. The fact that you're making all this money in this society, it ain't about all of your creativity and stuff, because there are creative people all over the world. It is about the infrastructure that my folks and your folks and other people of color built in this country that is the real catalytic factor. It ain't that we're any smarter than anyone. We have an underlying infrastructure that permits people who have creativity to exploit that creativity and innovate. And It was built, though, on the backs of our people. We built the country without labor. And that's a whole nother discussion. I ain't going there right now. My thing is, where's the business community? You need to be standing up for voting, and you need to be saying everybody in America has a house. And incident to that is you pay people a sustainable wage. It ain't good living. People need to have a sustainable existence. So those are the two things that seem to me the most important for us to deal with right now, because they're so foundational for the survival of, I think we're still a democracy, but whatever we are, it's essential for sustaining that we deal with those issues.
And I don't know if the people who are watching tonight planned on coming to church service on a Thursday evening, but Junious Williams is preaching, and I appreciate everything that you're saying, because you're absolutely right. Bobby Stahl just says, I'm at church right now. Thank you, Junious.
Hey, Bobby, I've not seen you in a while.
So I think everything that you're saying is correct. And you said, if we're in a democracy right now, I can speak directly to being a newly elected official in the city of Oakland and talk about how our voice as a group of us of progressive elected officials are having our voices stymied and our work stifled at the local level. And so when you say that you were hamstrung with your with requirements for the land trust to acquire properties during the foreclosure crisis, with all of these different ways that it limited your ability to get the premium spaces, and speculators were able to just gobble up all of the spaces that were better and less in need of rehabilitation or whatever. Mm-hmm. It makes me think that there's something larger at play. If the markets or our governments at the state and federal level allow that to happen, and are allowing currently the delay of what people are calling an eviction tsunami when the moratoria end, what kind of democracy is that? Where the incomes are staying stagnant, or because of COVID have disappeared for many working people, but then the cost of rental units and housing prices have gone up, and homelessness is on an upward trend that is directly parallel to the increase in cost of housing. Who's making that happen? Who's allowing that to happen? And what can we do about it?
Well, for me, a lot of this has to do with trying to revisit what we believe in, and what we believe that people have a right as human beings to have. And, for me, having the fact that we are arguing in this society, in this culture, about whether every human being is entitled to a certain set of basic human rights: food, shelter, the right to vote, the right to education, association. We know those fundamental things, but we haven't agreed on those. And in fact, we seem to be going in the opposite direction. So part of it for me, and this goes back to housing, part of the problem, but only part of the problem with housing, is the fact that we have suppressed wages for 2 or 3 generations. Right. That's part of the problem. It's not all of it, because we shouldn't let the market, like in a high rate market like the Bay Area, we just shouldn't let it run wild. But you've got to guarantee people basic things. That's why I'm a big supporter of basic income guarantee. I don't like the universal, because it's contrary to the notion of equity. I do not need anybody contributing anything to me, right? I mean, and so any plan that's going to give me money out of that is not a good plan. It's not equitable. I don't have particular needs. So, I just think that figuring out how structurally that we're dealing with some of these, like I'm really impressed by what I've seen in the data from the Stockton experiment, and I see that Oakland's going to experiment and other people. I would just hope we would accelerate that, because part of the solution to this is that people shouldn't be struggling on basic necessities for survival. And we've got a significant portion of the population that has to do that. And to me, that's a structural problem. There needs to be a guaranteed income for people. And certainly anybody working a full-time job should not be struggling. It's just that it's antithetical to this whole thing of our whole credo is that if I'm working hard and contributing, why should I be struggling? And so anyway, I won't go on, but I just think that that's the sort of level we need to start having as a country and as a community. What are we going to guarantee to everybody as just a basic human right, and everybody who resides in the nation? Documentation and that stuff is irrelevant. It's the issue of what do people need to survive, and are we going to guarantee that to people so that we can elevate to the next level?
I think that's a great segue into the United Nations article in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's part of the document that you shared with me that speaks to the equity principles for community empowerment and land use and economic development. So I just wanted to speak a little bit about the United Nations and their housing as a human right statement, because we often say that when we're doing actions or chants or protests, that we need to fight to make housing a human right. But that is literally Article 25, the right to adequate standard of living, in which Article 25 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says that human rights covers a wide range of rights, including those to adequate food, water, sanitation, clothing, housing, medical care, as well as social protection, covering situations beyond one's control, COVID, but also including disability, widowhood, unemployment, and old age. And mothers and children are singled out for care. So if that is not the epitome of what we're experiencing right now, I don't know what is. And people living in unsheltered spaces in the city of Oakland lack all of those things, which indicates that we are like blatantly in violation of human rights, of people's human rights. And in this document, you have 8 principles and values for equitable development. And I wanted to touch base with you and see if these principles would support development that would address people living in encampments right now. Because I'll be honest, working at ACE as the director at ACE, our job was to keep people from becoming homeless in the first place, right? That's why we dealt with renters who were experiencing harassment by bad landlords, by slumlords, people that were callous and willing to put people on the streets. But we didn't deal necessarily with a homeless population in general. But now we're having to. Now, a lot of my friends in different organizations are having to. So how do these principles address the crisis of homelessness that we're experiencing in Oakland?
Well, I think in a couple of ways. One, just from the foundation, is about this notion of equity. That if you, as a society or as an individual or as a corporation, has done injury to someone, you need to make them whole. And many of the people who are unhoused, as you alluded to when you were citing the United Nations statement, through no fault of their own. I mean, part of the narrative out there is that if you're in America and you ain't doing well, it's got something to do with you. No, that belies the reality that there are structures in place that for many of the people who are disenfranchised or have been marginalized, it wasn't their doing. I mean, it wasn't any failure on their part. They're sort of structural failures. So I think it starts with the principle of equity, that you've got to address the needs of people who we failed in some way. Secondly, is the principle that you just cited, that housing is a human right. The other things are, how do you begin to, and this is where we started, that it's about how you control land and who controls the land in the community, because part of the resource, at least for addressing housing needs, is how we do development in the community and what we exact from people who want to come into the community and, yes, build new things, but also make profit. And how do you share that? If you're staying in a capitalistic model, you shouldn't let a robber baron come in and make a lot of money and walk out with it and leave the community with some new amenities or new development that most of the folks there can't afford and walk away. So who controls the land, and what you do in terms of exacting some measure of contribution from people who want to do development in the city. And that's how we got into the community benefits thing, is that Oakland had an inferiority complex for years. You can't ask developers to do anything because then they'll go someplace else.
Right.
And what started happening over time is there was no place else to go. The whole Bay Area was exploding, and Oakland was the cheapest place. So at one point we got into the discussion with City Council. Well, respond to that bluff. Tell them, okay, if you don't like the deal available in Oakland, go someplace else. Where are you going to go? San Jose? Every place else is more expensive to do the work. And Oakland was a hot market. And with that, that's why we went into the community benefits work, is to say one way to get more housing, more economic opportunity, more employment, more business opportunity was to exact some benefits for folks in the community when developers came and wanted to do big projects. And I say that that's a longer term thing, but that begins to deal with how you benefit people who are unhoused, is that you create a stream of revenue and a demand that people are attend to the needs of folks who don't have housing when we're building new developers, especially when we're building housing stock.
Yeah, I think you made some very critical points, and I do want to circle back to the guaranteed income and the Stockton model. I will say that our mayor of Oakland has been talking about a universal basic income for quite some time, for maybe the last year or two. And when I mentioned in a city council meeting that I wanted to make a permanent source through CDBG funds, because the $13 million that we get we have no indicator that it's actually changing things for people. So we should think about using those funds as guaranteed income for Oakland's low-income residents. Then in the next couple of days, they launched this program for Oakland. I hope that my comments at the city council meeting motivated the mayor to do something. But we went from BIPOC communities having access to these funds to now them being open to everyone through a random drawing or lottery. But I think we need an equity analysis, like you just said, to identify the people with the greatest need, because that's one of the ways that inequity is exacerbated, because there's no analysis about where is the deepest need. And I think that's part of what drives our development as well, because we keep seeing market rate development built without real community benefits. And I wanted you to touch a little bit on the impact fees, because that was one of the ways we were supposed to be able to get equity in the housing development. And I was record, I'm willing to call the bluff of developers that are like, if we can't build it the way we want to build it, we're going to leave Oakland. I will say congratulations in finding something else. but leave Oakland, because this is what we need in this city. But I know people are going to be mad at me for that. I'm just saying. I just wanted it out there. But if you could speak a little bit to impact fees and that as a solution to creating accessible and affordable housing for low-income people.
Well, as I understand it, it was sort of a compromise over the real push for having a more robust inclusionary zoning ordinance in the city. I haven't followed it much recently, but you know, when I lost track of it, we seem to have bungled the collection and distribution of the funds. It's probably not ideal, but it's some movement toward capturing some benefit locally of all of the development was occurring. But as I said, I was sorely disappointed. And so that goes on the list of a number of things that we need to be more attentive to. We have created a number of different tools and opportunities in the city of Oakland, many of which have not operated to benefit the residents that they were intended to benefit, because we haven't been effective stewards of that money. The fact that we can't even, or at least when I stopped paying attention to it, we couldn't even correctly account for how many dollars had come in. We hadn't collected those, that we don't serve when we do get the political will to do something for poor people or people of color. We bungle the implementation so that often the benefits never reach the intended beneficiaries. And that seems to have been, now they may have cleaned it up in the last couple of years and it's on the right track, but that is the case with some of the contract compliance stuff and liquidated damages on when people don't meet their obligations under agreements around hiring. We've got a problem there. All of these things, it seems like we lose the will and the fortitude to do the last stage of implementation. And that's where it really impacts the people. Erecting the staff and all that infrastructure, that's all necessary, but it's useless if nobody ended up getting the benefits of those things that people fought for. So I think that part of that falls back on us, that we need to be more vigilant in demanding accountability for implementation of the victories that we win. And that's partially on the city and government, but that's partially on us, because we need to pay more attention and be more vigilant about demanding that those things get implemented once we get the victory. But you know, I mean, you're an organizer. I don't need to tell you, you just jump to the next fight. And yeah. What our relationship is with some of the intermediaries and the advocacy groups and stuff has to be restructured, because this is a place they should be coming in and taking over and kicking ass about where's the data, what's happening on implementation, because the organizers and base builders need to go on, because, you know, they're creating more problems faster than we can respond to them. So I understand why we don't stick with the implementation, but we've got to develop a structure where that gets handed off to people who can do that work, so we realize the benefits of the labor.
You are absolutely right. As an organizer, I know when we have a victory, we move to the next fight, because there's so much to do. And there's we don't celebrate our victories. We don't push for implementation oftentimes, because, you know, there's so much on our shoulders. So I think you all heard it from Junious Williams here best. Like, it's time for folks to be kicking ass. So we need people to follow up and continue the fights after we have victories, to ensure that our victories are actually implemented. So you are here with me tonight, City Council Member Carroll Fife and Junious Williams, who sounds like a revolutionary activist. And so I love the energy. I love the fire. And if you have questions for either one of us, please go ahead and drop them in the chat. And for folks who I see the comments just really getting in, we have, Oakland Community Land Trust is here. They dropped the link for the equitable principles for community empowerment and land use. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
And let me say something though, could I, Carol, about the issue?
Yes.
I'm an old timer and I need to be careful about not getting in the way of young people because I'm a realist. Yet I was totally crazy at 18. You wouldn't recognize me, and through my 20s, but you calm down over time. You start compromising. So the relationship between old fellas like me and younger folks like you, we got to get that together because I can offer, some advice and stuff, but you've got to be like unapologetically ready to kick ass.
Yeah.
And at the stage of life, I've done the ass kicking I'm going to do at
Yeah.
this point, and I shouldn't be in the way of young people taking over. I think and I don't know if you've seen the statistics, it's a societal problem. We got a president who's 70, 8 years old?
I think it's 78 or really.
Yeah. The average age of people in Congress is over 60.
Yeah.
The age of the population is more like 18. We've got a generational problem that we need to solve in some way. So figuring out the old tradition of how, the old timers hand over the mantle to the young people and do a supportive role. I want to make sure that we're conscious of that because you need a certain energy, vigor, and almost I don't give a damn sort of attitude to do the work. And as you get older, that shit fades away.
Yeah.
A little safer. So I'm probably in a safe stage. I talk a lot of stuff. It's not like I'm on the front lines, but that's for you and other folks in your generation to do and for us to support you.
Well, I'm definitely not feeling that young, and I'm looking at all the youth organizers who are pushing for reparations in schools, who are fighting for climate justice, who are doing amazing work around Asian and Black unity and organizing and indigenous rights and all of the different things. There are too many to name, and I am ready to move over too because they are doing an amazing job. And I'm not terribly young, but if this is the not fiery Junious and you were crazy at 18, I would have loved to seen that because you still seem pretty fiery to me, which I love. I think it's necessary. And I'm definitely willing to use my position and not care, but really work in the best interests of the people who need our help. That's what I'm here for. That's what people put me in a position for. And I look forward to your mentorship to help me just kind of figure out some things that I might not know. And that's why we have you here this evening. So I don't know if we have any questions. We do. We have a question from Tanya Love. How do residents and activists hold the city and administration accountable for implementation? What's your best advice?
Well, I think there are a couple things, and a lot of the things that we create commissions, monitoring mechanisms. We got to make sure that the right people get on those sort of bodies. That's sort of the first stage, because that's where you learn the nitty gritty of what's going on so that you can make input into how to improve it. But the other thing is the organizing and action. The other stuff is, I think we've gotten pretty tame about legal action. Even administrative sort of legal action. I just think that we're not relying enough on those sorts of tools anymore, because many of us are now in this sort of, and myself included, I'm working a lot with collaborations, and the worst thing you can do is sue somebody in the collaborative. So it's kind of not that, but that's where this notion of inside outside game. If I'm doing collaborative work, maybe I can't do it, but maybe there's somebody outside who poses that legal threat to get people to do what they're supposed to do. And I think we've sort of in many respects, backed off a little of being as aggressive in threatening and litigating against people on some of these issues around performance.
So
But
you
really
use litigation? So you're saying use litigation as a tool?
Well, I'm just saying that using legal tactics, it might not always be litigation. It might be administrative procedures. It might be filing. There might be, but making sure that we keep legal pressure on to make the people and the organizing and political pressure on to make people who sit on those monitoring, oversight commissions and boards to position them well to do the work there, because it's really hard, as you know, to sit on those tables, try to work with people, and also then running around, bashing them. So I think a division of labor is really important, but to support those folks. But I think that's a big one. The other is making sure we're creating the right structures for accountability, and that we get the right people in compliance roles within government, because that's a really important part. If they're more aggressive, if they're better at getting the data and monitoring implementation of some of these, it makes it easier to figure out what's working and not working, and to improve the practices so we get better outcomes.
And I would also include what I can say on a live recording is that I think it's also important to use nonviolent civil disobedience as a tool. I think, just from my personal experience, there are people who've told me over the years not to engage in certain activities because it's illegal, specifically around the mom's house occupation. But even in the foreclosure crisis, when Acorn or ACE was taking back homes from bank foreclosures, that wasn't necessarily legal. But if you look at just the what's on the surface of this house belongs to a corporation or a bank, you may miss the illegality and the immorality of the initial sin and the initial crime of taking wealth and stripping value and properties and land and wages and all of the different ways theft occurs through white collar crime and other state sanctioned violence on communities of color that caused that civil disobedience action to be necessary in the first place. Mm-hmm. So I think that's critical to say, because really we need to take back our cities by any means necessary. That is my personal belief. It's not for everybody to hold, but the conditions that we're living in right now would prove that no one is waiting around the corner to save us. No, there's no bat symbol that we can shine to have a hero come in and swoop down and save the day. And in fact, in that same United Nations declaration, it says that poverty is both a cause and a consequence of violations of human rights. It's a cause and a consequence of people's rights being violated in the first place. And it is not about individual responsibility, which is the narrative in America. Like, if you're a rugged individual and you work hard enough, then you will be successful. That's a lie that we've been fed that keeps people in shame. And we need to dispose of that. I was just before I had to rush home for this live today, I was just at an encampment behind a church in West Oakland. And there was an elder sister there who survived breast cancer, but because of the healthcare and medical bills, she was made homeless. Another elder sister who had been the victim of domestic violence and ended up on the street. A makeup artist. All these women came from these different camps, and my heart was breaking. And I'm like, why do we allow this to happen in one of the wealthiest countries in the world? And I don't care. Like you said, I don't give a damn. I'm going to work to change that with the little bit of privilege that I have. I'm going to work to change that. And I'm looking for people who want to do that with me. And once again, Junious, I appreciate you being here and spitting the fire in church that you're spitting today. And for the people who are watching and listening, please share this with other folks so they can get on Team Kick Ass and start making some changes in the city of Oakland so we can get some things done. Robin Walker asked, where do we find the reports on the impact fees? Honestly, Robin, when I was running for city council, I was trying to find that information too. And it recently, I don't want to say recently, over the last few months, a report came out that was not, it wasn't sufficient in terms of the information in the report, but I will definitely get that out to you. And I'll have my chief of staff try to look for it and maybe drop it in the chat there. But I also want to say that something that Junious mentioned, I don't want to lose, is that we need to appoint the right people to the right positions. And in District 3, I have the ability to appoint people to different boards and commissions. And if you're interested in working in some of these agencies, oversight bodies, please let us know and email us at district3@oaklandca.gov. And then we can tell you what's available. And for those who want to get progressive training, check out Urban Habitat's BCLI program. Tanya just let us know. But we do have certain boards and commissions that we can appoint right now. So hit us up if you want to be included in that list. So we will get out the impact fee report, the most updated impact fee report, because I was talking about it in a lot of the debates that it didn't exist. They had to hurry up and get something out. And it's still inconclusive about where the monies actually were that were supposed to be collected for affordable housing development. I essentially believe that it's a high-priced bribe that developers pay to not have to have affordable housing and inclusionary zoning in the premises. And it's not providing what we need to actually develop the housing. But they've collected significant amounts of money, which shows that developers did not want to run away from Oakland. And they did decide to continue to build here, even with fees that were imposed. And we need to look at increasing those fees. We need to look at other solutions that we can get to get the funds needed to address housing and homelessness. And Mr. Williams, I'm not going to keep you very much longer here. We're going to try to take a couple questions and even some comments. So if we can drop some of the comments and let people know what folks are saying. What do you think should be the next steps in the city of Oakland about what not just residents, but the city council, some of the organizations who care about housing, what should we be working on, like next month, next week, tomorrow? What should we be doing?
You know, and I need to study it a little more, but one of the things, as I said, I do a lot of collective impact work. And one of the things that concerns me about collective impact is that for a lot of the communities, engaging in a long planning process while you're trying to get multi-stakeholders together is not, people can't wait. I mean, so I started looking, and I ran into this method called rapid results. And what was interesting is that most of the examples on this methodology came out of the housing area, including some of where the most success has been. And this is basically a model where you get people together who are already working in an area like housing people. Mm-hmm. And it's a strategy where you set out 100 days, we're going to impact this. So we're not talking about years stuff, 100 days. And what you really try to do is harness the understanding of the people who are already working in that on what could be done. Some requires money. There's often things that can be done most immediately. So I'm sort of intrigued by that model and trying to learn more about it because one, it deals with housing, but also this notion of, can you get people organized to do rapid results where you actually start having some immediate impact? And I know there's a lot of stuff that we need to contemplate and plan and stuff, and I'm all for that. I don't mind that, but it's got to be with a track so that if I'm in this community and I'm into planning and I want to sit at those tables, I can do that. But if I want to get out and do something right now to impact a problem, there's a track of work for me to support my community in doing that. So that's something. And again, I'm just learning about it and looking, but it struck me that many of the examples, and I'll send you the link to
Yes.
that. If you Google rapid results, you'll see that it's a whole methodology that's evolved. But I think that that sort of notion is a good one for us to sort of catalyze the community to start dealing with this stuff. It seems like many of us, myself included, sort of got immobilized by the magnitude of it. And so we're into planning and analysis stuff. And I think going to a model that says there's some stuff. Let me say one other thing really quickly that I don't often philosophize, but the more I think about what's happening here, America is like an adolescent. You best understand an adolescent, or you understand America through that sort of lens. So, and what adolescents typically do is that they have like no sense of limits on stuff, you know,
Yeah.
and no sense of how to protect oneself. And I analogize that to America. We don't understand that our most important feature is our people. And if you don't take care of your people, everything else that emanates from your people gets disrupted. And it's sort of like we really need to figure out how to take care of our people. And that goes back to where we started. What are the basic things that as a community we want to guarantee to everyone? And the notion that we have like kind of ignored our human resource part of this is part of our problem, is that if you invest in your people in the same way that we're talking about investing in buildings and stuff, it's why I like where Biden is apparently going in his new definition of infrastructure. I think he's right on point. Infrastructure just ain't about some bridges and some highways. There's a human infrastructure, and we use that. So talking about how do you deploy people who have been doing the caring work in our society, be they teachers, early childhood, in-home care people, all of the people do care. We've exploited their labor. We haven't paid them. We've made their families vulnerable. I like that notion of, no, we're going to redo that. If we take care of our most important resource, which is the human beings that we have, then a lot of the other things are going to get better. So I'm really thinking about the notion of our human resource and what's happening there about building that part of the infrastructure in this society. So I'm excited as I'm reading that I think we may have it, or he may have it right. And I say we because I think I want to support the notion that this is far beyond. And that means that you have to deal with stuff like how many people are unhoused, how many people aren't eating, all of the sort of things. And a final point, we need to be prepared about the trauma and the mental health stuff. But it's an opportunity too. What if we said that there's a role for adults to be inside schools and that it's paid work and our kids have the constant contact with adults, not just the teachers, but we begin flooding these environments with helping adults, some from the community, some certified, figure all of that out so that we can deal with what's going to come at the other as we emerge from the COVID pandemic. So.
I think that's key, and I think what's lacking is this creativity and a sense of care in the larger public sphere, and meaning care for other people. And while I do support the framework that you just suggested that Biden is moving in regarding infrastructure, I will say that when I was a drafter of the Democratic platform for 2020,
Mhm.
they took out my amendment to make housing a human right. So that made me mad, but it
Yeah.
is what it is. But we got to keep our fingers crossed. And
Yeah.
I did see a comment from Jen Finley. It looks like it disappeared. Yeah, we need to do something about the vilification of the homeless population, particularly in the context of the recent fires. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, Jen. It's an immediate blaming of the individuals who are experiencing houselessness when these fires happen. And I've been outdoors in the rain and in the cold, and I can only imagine what people have to do to heat themselves. I've also lived in cities where people have frozen to death because it's so cold at nighttime. Children, and so it just goes back to people need to be indoors. People need to have adequate heating, adequate plumbing, adequate sewage maintenance and management. But when we become accustomed to allowing human beings to live under freeways and on the sides of streets and on sidewalks, then these are the types of incidents that they get blamed for or that occur from them just trying to stay alive. So we are experiencing more anger about the structures that catch fire than people's lives who are actually on fire. And we got to change that. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Um, we're not going. We only got a few more minutes. Are there any other comments that folks want to ask or bring up while we have Junious Williams on the line with us this evening? Okay, we're here's a comment. I think it's Chuck Ning Lee that's saying, I don't want to get anyone in trouble, but I'd gratefully hear if Mr. Williams has thoughts about the current development proposal at Howard Terminal in D3. Many community members have volunteered their time in the CBA process that's almost finalized. What can we do to make sure that the A's keep their promise to keep the development 100% privately funded? Additionally, the draft EIR, Environmental Impact Report, just came out, and currently the public is required to submit their comments with a mere 54 days plus a 15-day extension. Mr. Williams, what say you?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is nothing of that scale is ever 100% private. And that's what we had to get over in our own thinking about how the city operated and development happened in the city. There is all public contribution, and therefore the city is in the position to leverage its police power. Whether somebody says we just want a permit and we don't want, you always want something from us. The infrastructure, there'll be something. So that's the first thing, to dispel the notion it ain't going to be 100%. So if you're being sold that, it's wrong from the outset. The second thing, and I was in a meeting last night with the West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project and the Bay Area Air Quality Management District on the owning the air plan for West Oakland under AB 617. And I'm going through that because there was a presentation last night, and I don't have the person's name, but Margaret Gordon or Brian Beveridge can tell you. There was a presentation by a group that is coordinating the comment process and for that. And I would strongly suggest what they've done is that they've organized a website where you can go in and see other people's comments. You can comment. So it's taken the burden off of every individual to go through everything. And I would strongly recommend that people do that and contribute to it, because as you know, under a CEQA, every comment has to be responded to by the city. So it's really incumbent upon everybody to take a look at that, find out the issues that are of concern to you, go to that chapter, look at what they're saying is likely to be the impact of the project on that area of interest, and make comments about what you want to have happen. The other thing is that you got to be hard-nosed, and I don't know kind of who is involved in negotiating the community benefits, but I will tell you this, that I am concerned because the community benefits movement got co-opted by city governments, who now are doing what's called community benefits packages, which is, oh, we'll take care of the community benefits as a city and we'll work with the developer. The reason we went another route, both here in Oakland and in San Francisco, in the work that we did, is that very early on, cities don't sue developers. They don't even enforce the agreements with developers. So why would we subject something that is important to the community to exclusive control of the city? And that's why we formed the coalition that negotiated here in Oakland on Brooklyn Basin, I guess they call it now, has a third-party community benefits agreement that we have independent powers, or the signatories had independent powers that weren't controlled by the city in terms of enforcement of that agreement. Same thing in San Francisco on the agreement that we negotiated there. So that for me is a really important thing, is to make sure that you're creating some independent rights in the community and community-based organizations, and not leaving it exclusively to the city. Because I think the city has done a little better with the West Oakland development, but if you, all of the things before those, we got promises, and nothing delivered, because the cities don't enforce agreements if the community is not there, both informing what that agreement's going to be and there to monitor the fact that people are delivering on their promises. And in our case, having standing to sue them if the parties don't live up to their agreement. So that to me is really important, and that's a big one. I don't take a position either way on the project because I haven't looked at it, but I do know the mechanics of making sure you get the right mechanism for monitoring and oversight and the right enforcement mechanisms for non-compliance with any community benefits that the developer agrees to.
That sounds like a way to make sure that the project has teeth on the side of the community for the benefit of the community. That makes a lot of sense. And I think we might have to have a separate live just on community benefits agreements, specifically as it relates to District 3, because that's where a lot of the development is happening or wants to happen. So I think that's a whole nother live down the road after the budget process.
Yeah. There's some good people around. Julian Gross is around. He was a lawyer for a lot of these. He's still around. I think he's over at Policy Link. So there's some good resources to help educate people about community benefits agreements there.
You're not about to have Margaret Gordon beat me up for bringing Julian Gross on my show. No. But yeah, Miss Margaret, I already know how you feel. But I do want to say that we're going to wrap it up. We've been talking for an hour with one of the premier minds of, first we have to say, Herb Castillo is saying, thank you for your wisdom and opportunity to learn. Would love to connect and kick ass. Let's do it. Let's do it. So you can email us at the email address that's in the thread. Tanya put it in there. Tanya Love is my chief of staff. It's d3@oaklandca.gov. And you can just put in the subject line. You don't even have to put a message in the message box. Just say kick ass, and then we'll know what you're talking about. And then we'll give you a call back and follow up and get you on Team Kick Ass. But that said, once again, we've heard church. We had some sermons tonight from Junious Williams. Junious, I appreciate you being here. And I'm going to give you the last word, but I'm going to leave with a proverb that my husband shared with me. And it says, the child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. And we've got to stop our village from being burned down, because that's literally what's happening physically and just morally. So that's one of my goals, and housing is key to that. And so, like I said, email us Team Kickass, so you can get on board, so we can work together, because this is going to be done through collective effort. And Junious, I'm going to give you the last word before we sign off.
Oh no, that was a better last word than I can contribute. I like that. Thank
All
you
right.
for Carol and your staff for arranging this. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you.
Likewise. And there'll be more. I'm just going to be calling you and texting you. You're going to be like, oh my God, I never should have talked to her. But, it's going to take all of us. Thank you for being here with us this evening. Thank you all for tuning in. Share it with your friends. Let them know. And then join us. We got work to do. Good night, everybody.
Good night.